Hey, and welcome back to another video. Okay, in this video, we are going to talk about the chapter 3 of the part 4 of how to influence friends and people. Okay, in last video, we talk about the principle 2, that is the call attention to people's mistake indirectly, not saying by directly. We are call attention to people's mistake indirectly. In the first chapter, first principle we have discussed, that is begin with praise and honest appreciation. Okay, let's talk about your own mistakes first. Okay, talk about your own mistakes first. My niece, Josephine Carnegie, had come to New York to be my secretary. She was 19, had graduated from high school 3 years previously, and her business experience was a triple more than zero. She became one experience was a triple more than zero. She became one of the most propitiate secretaries west of Suez, but in the beginning she was susceptible to improvement. One day when I started to criticize her, I said to myself, just a minute, tell Dale Carnegie, just a minute. You are twice as old as Joseph Finn. You have had 10,000 times as much business experience. How can you possibly expect her to have your viewpoint, your judgment, your initiative, mediocre though they may be? And just a minute, Dale, what? Were you doing at 19? Remember, the 9 mistake and blunders you made. Remember the time you did this and that. After thinking the matter over honestly and impartially, I concluded that Josephine's batting average at 19 was better than mine had been, and that I am sorry to confess isn't paying Josephine much of a compliment. So after that, when I wanted to call Josephine's attention to a mistake, I used to begin by saying, "You have made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's no worse than many I have made. You were not born with judgment. That comes only with experience, and you are better than I was at your age. I have been guilty of so many stupid, silly things myself. I have very little inclination to criticize you and or anyone, but don't you think it too would have been wiser if you had done so and so? It isn't nearly so difficult to listen to a recital of your faults if the person criticizing begins by humbly admitting that he too is far from impeccable. E.G. Dilliston, an engineer in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada, was having problems with his new secretary. Letters he dispatched. Letters he detected were coming to his desk for signature with 2 or 3 spelling mistakes per page. Mr. Dilliston reported how he handled this. Like many engineers, I have not been noted for my excellent English or spelling. For years, I have kept a little black thumb index book for words I had trouble spelling. When it becomes affirmed that merely pointing out the errors was not going to cause my secretary to do more proofreading and dictionary work. I resolved to take another approach. When he detected just unlike English term When the next letter came to my attention that had errors in it, I sat down with the typist and said, somehow this word does not look right. It's one of the words I always have had trouble with. That's the reason I started this spelling in time. People do judge us by our letters and misspellings, make us look less professional. I don't know whether she copied my system or not, but since that conversation, her frequency or demonible. The Polish prince Bonvola Leon the sharp necessity of doing this back in 1909. Von Buller was then the necessity of Roland von Buller learned the sharp necessity of doing this back in 1909. Von Buller was then the imperial chancellor. On the throne sat William II, Wilhelm the haughty, William the arrogant, William the last of the German casiers. Buildings are army and navy that he boasted could weave their weight in wild carts. Then an astonishing thing happened. The Kaiser said things, incredible things, things that rocked the continent. I started to series of explosions heard around the world. To make matters finitely worse, the Kaiser made silly, egotistical to make matters infinitely worse, and the Kaiser made silly, egoistically absurd announcements in public. He made them while he was a guest in England, and he gave his royal permission to have them printed in the Daily Telegraph. To make infinitely worse, Kaiser made silly, egotistical, absurd announcement. Public, he made them while he was guest in England, and he gave his royal permission to have them printed in the Daily Telegraph. For example, he declared that he was the only German who felt friendly that he was constructing a navy against the means of Japan, that he and he alone, and he like mm. For example, he declared that he was the only German who felt friendly toward the English. Means of Japan, that he and he alone had saved England from being humbled in the dust by Russia and France, that it had been Russia and France, that is had been his campaign plan that enabled England's Lord Roberts to defeat the Boers in South Africa and so on. No other such amazing such. Okay. And no other such amazing words had ever fallen from the lips of a European king in peacetime. Within 100 years, the entire continent buzzed with the fury of a hornet's nest. England was insane. German statesmen were aghast. And in the midst of all this consternation, the Kaiser became panicky and suggested to Prince von Buller, the imperial chancellor, that he take the blame. Yes, he wanted von Buller to announce that it was all his responsibility, that he had advised his monarchs to say these incredible things. But your majesty, von Buller protested, it seems to me utterly impossible that anybody either in Germany or England could suppose me capable of having advised your majesty to say any such thing. The moment those words were out of von Buller's mouth, he realized he had made a grave mistake. The Kaiser blew off. You consider me a donkey, he shouted, capable of blunders you yourself could never have committed. Von Buller knew that he ought to have praised before he condemned, but since that was too late, he did the next thing. He praised after he had criticized, and it was a miracle. I am far from suggesting that he answered respectfully. Your Majesty surpasses me in many respects, not only, of course, in naval and military knowledge, but above all in natural science. I have often listened in admiration when Your Majesty explained the barometer or wireless telegraphy or the Roent Jane race. I am shamefully ignorant of all branches of natural science, have no notion of chemistry or physics, and I am quite capable of explaining the simplest of natural phenomena, but von Buller he hung Van Villa continued, in the compensation, I possess some historical knowledge and perhaps certain qualities useful in politics, especially in diplomacy. In Kaiser beamed, Von Villa had praised him. Von Villa had exalted him and humbled himself. The Kaiser could forgive anything after that. Haven't I always told you? He exclaimed that with enthusiasm, that we complete one another famously. We should stick together and we will. He shook hands with Von Buller not once but several times, and later in the day he waxed to so enthusiastic that he exclaimed with doubled fist, "If anyone says anything to the men, but he shook hands with Von Buller not once but several times. Later in the day, he waxed so enthusiastic that he exclaimed with doubled fist, "If anyone says anything to me again, love you." Double fist, if anyone says anything to me against Prince Von Buller, I shall punch him in the nose. Von Buller saved himself in time, but canny diplomat that he nevertheless had made one error. He had more vigorous Von Buller, but canny diplomat that was he nevertheless had made one error. He should have begun by praise. Should have begun by talking about his own shortcomings and William's severity. About his shortcomings and William's superiority, not by intimating that they about shortcomings William, not by intimating that the caser was a half-wit in need of a guardian. If a few sentences humbling oneself and praising the other party can turn a haughty, insulted caser into a such a superior. If a few sentences humbling oneself and praising the other party can turn a haughty, insulted caser into a stomach. Um, mm, mm. Humility and praise can do for you and me in our daily contact. Rightfully used, they will work vertable miracles in human relations. Admitting one's own mistakes, even when one hasn't corrected them, can help convince uh, mm, change his behavior. This was illustrated more recently by Clarence J. Hussein of Timonium Mirror, Timonium Mirror when he discovered his 15 years old son was experimenting. Seven. Naturally, I did not want to David to smoke, Mr. J. Hussein told us, but I told Ray. Okay, smokes told mother and I smoke cigarettes. We were giving him a bad example all the time. I explained to Dave how I started smoking at about his age and how the nicotine had gotten the worst life about his age and how the nicotine had gotten the waste of the and now it was nearly impossible for me to stop. I remember uh, mm, it was nearly impossible for me to stop. I reminded him how irritating my cough was and how he had been after me to give up cigarettes not many years before. I did not exert the same about the dangers. I did not exhort him to stop or make threats or warn him about the dangers. All I did was point out how I was hooked on cigarettes and what it had meant to me. Okay, he thought it for a while and decided he wouldn't smoke until he had graduated from high school. The years spent by David never did graduate. Until he had graduated from high school, as 3 years went, David never did start smoking and has no intention of ever doing so. As a result of the conversation, I made the kind of decision to stop smoking cigarettes by myself and With the support of my family, a good leader follows this principle. And cigarette smoking cigarette. And talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. This is all about the chapter number 3. Talk about your own mistakes first. This is all about chapter number 3, and see you next week with another chapter.